So what we're really talking about here is more than a metaphor. I'm not here to talk to you about dangerous contexts and skydiving and Army things because it's an interesting metaphor that parallels business leadership. What I'm talking about are actual psychological things that are going on in your head and in your people's heads. And we're going to talk about how to manage those and how I know that, because it took a lot of research to figure this out. And we're going to go through that quickly. And the reason that I couldn't use existing research from the Academy of Management or from American Management Association journals and so forth is represented on this slide. And this is all about science. It's all about this evidentiary basis that I said we have to have before something goes onto the teaching platform. So you start over on the left side of that slide with a theory or an idea about, in our case, leadership. And then by observation or definition or what have you, you move over into where you can see it, into the empirical space. So you do experiments or you do observations. And then you think about what you saw. You think about the results and you change your theory, and that continues to iterate, whether you're a physicist or whether you're a social scientist. Like, that's just science. That's the philosophy of science. I don't make the rules. But part of the rules are that scientific evidence is limited to the context in which it's gathered. So if you do a chemistry experiment at room temperature, you can't assume that the reaction is going to be the same at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay? It is the same in leadership research. I can't take research that was done with college sophomores in a setting where they don't even want people slamming doors because it's too disturbing. I can't apply that in dangerous contexts with good conscience. So we had to do our own. So I'm going to talk to you about how we built this tradition called in extremis leadership that's now in Harvard Business Review, and it's going all over the place. And we started with a definition. And I was just surfing, trying to find something to call it. And I came upon this DoD term, in extremis, which is Latin for at the point of death. If you happen to be a Catholic, it's when a priest gives last rites, in extremis. Okay? It's also a Department of Defense term for somebody's about to get killed. So if you hear that, that's sort of what's being communicated. So I added to that a leadership definition and created a context where followers believe that leader behavior will influence their physical well-being or survival. So it's leadership, but in conditions where followers believe that a leader can get them killed or not. Okay? Why is it important to define it that way? Well, beliefs are measurable. I'm a social psychologist. We measure beliefs all the time, especially in an election year. And we measure intentions, and we measure behaviors. So when you do it that way, it's empirical. If you try to measure the actual danger in a context, it just doesn't work. If I'm on the side of a mountain and I'm a climbing guide, I might not consider that to be dangerous, but the client who's with me might be petrified. Okay? So it just depends on what your beliefs are, what you're thinking about the circumstances you're in. So we're going to talk about followers, and we're going to talk about what they're looking for in leaders in a crisis. Because your people, when your business unit or your family's in a crisis, all eyes are going to be on you. And you need to know what they're expecting, what's important to them. So I started doing research on this in 2003, and I started right here with followers. If you go into the management literature and you look at leadership research, probably something like 80 to 85% of it is done on leaders themselves. Because you know what? Business professors love to talk to CEOs. They love to be around the seats of power, and they like to interview important people. But if you want to find out about leadership, ask the people who are being led. They'll tell you. And soldiers, they'll always tell you. They will always tell you what you need. So we started working on this, myself and 3 other Army officers in 2003. And there was one other validating criteria that I had to have before they could be part of my study, and that was that they had had somebody get killed on their watch. And to me, that was even more significant validation that they were truly expert in extremis leaders. And the reason that I take this approach is that there's sort of 2 ways of looking at crisis leadership and studying it. You can study case studies, business cases, of people who were in a business, and then there was a crisis, and then they kind of led through it and so forth and made their way out of it. But as I think through that, it's kind of like if you wanted to be good at golf, would you study amateur golfers who found themselves in the rough and then were able to chip their way out? No. No, you would study golf pros. Okay? You would study people that do it all the time really, really well. And so that's what my work is about. How do we learn from people who do this really, really well all the time? So what I'm going to do now is kind of walk you through the framework that this generated, because it tells us not only how to lead in dangerous contexts, but it tells you how to lead in crisis, and it especially tells you what your people are thinking about you in crisis.